Before sunrise in Japan, the fishing ports are already alive. Under freezing rain and powerful ocean winds, thousands of fishing boats slowly leave the harbor and head toward deep offshore waters. While millions of people are still sleeping, fishermen have already begun another dangerous day at sea. Every single day, Japan consumes more than 8,000 tons of seafood. Fresh tuna arrives at sushi restaurants only hours after being caught. Salmon, squid, crab, and countless other species move through massive seafood markets before spreading across the entire country. But behind that enormous seafood industry lies a world most people never see. Far from shore, fishermen work on wet and slippery decks while giant waves crash against the boats. Hydraulic winches pull massive fishing nets from deep underwater, as steel cables shake under extreme tension. In rough weather, even one mistake can cause serious injuries within seconds. Yet, despite the danger, the boats continue operating day and night, because the money hidden beneath the ocean is enormous. A single premium bluefin tuna can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars in Japan. Some successful fishing voyages can generate nearly $1 million in less than a week. That reward drives thousands of fishermen back into dangerous waters every season. Modern fishing boats now look more like floating factories than traditional vessels. Radar systems scan the ocean for fish schools. Sonar tracks movement beneath the surface. Powerful freezing chambers preserve seafood immediately after harvest, so the fish can remain fresh during long offshore journeys. At night, giant squid boats illuminate the ocean with powerful LED lights bright enough to turn dark water into artificial daylight. During winter storms, snow crab crews continue working on frozen decks while icy waves slam directly across the ship. But even with all this technology, Japan's fishing industry is facing a growing crisis. Fish populations are shrinking. Squid catches have collapsed in some regions, forcing fishermen to travel farther offshore while spending more money on fuel and equipment just to survive another season. Still, every morning the boats continue leaving port, because millions of people across Japan are already waiting for fresh seafood to arrive. In northern Japan, the fishing day begins long before sunrise. At around 5 in the morning, the ports of Hokkaido are already covered in freezing rain. Strong ocean winds sweep through the harbor while fishing boats slowly leave shore and disappear into the dark Pacific waters. For the crews on board, there is no time to wait for better weather. Salmon season moves quickly, and every hour at sea matters. Far offshore, giant fixed gill nets are already waiting beneath the surface. These underwater nets stretch through the cold ocean like invisible walls designed to guide entire schools of salmon into a trap section at the end. Once the fish enter the system, escaping becomes almost impossible. As soon as the boat reaches the fishing grounds, the crew immediately begins hauling the nets back from the sea. Hydraulic winches start pulling thousands of meters of heavy rope while freezing seawater crashes violently across the deck. The conditions are brutal. The seawater in Hokkaido is so cold that even a few seconds of contact can make the fishermen's hands go numb. Every wave feels like ice striking directly against the skin. But, despite the freezing temperature, sweat still runs down the workers' faces as they struggle against the heavy nets and screaming machinery. The ocean freezes the body, the work burns it back up again. As the hauling continues, thick steel cables shake under enormous tension only a few feet away from the crew. The deck becomes dangerously slippery from seawater, rain, and fish scales. One wrong step near the moving rollers can cause serious injuries within seconds. Even experienced fishermen remain extremely careful during every haul. After several minutes, the end of the net finally breaks through the surface. Dozens of large salmon suddenly appear, thrashing violently inside the net bag. The crew quickly rushes forward with giant scoops, lifting the fish on board as fast as possible before another wave crashes across the boat. Within only a short time, the deck is covered with flashing silver salmon, freezing seawater, and heavy rain. But catching the fish is only the beginning. To protect the quality of the meat, the salmon must be preserved immediately after harvest. Some fish are carefully bled on board before being transferred into cold circulating seawater tanks, designed to maintain freshness during the long journey back to shore. For high-end sushi markets in Japan, even small changes in freshness can affect the value of the catch dramatically. Yet even with modern equipment, the fishermen still face major losses. Seals and sea lions frequently attack salmon trapped inside the nets before the crews can retrieve them. Toward the end of the season, many fishing areas become nearly empty, forcing boats to travel farther offshore while burning more fuel searching for smaller catches. When the boats finally return to port, another massive operation immediately begins. Workers unload the salmon and inspect every fish carefully by size, weight, and overall quality. Seafood companies, restaurants, and distributors compete for the best catches before refrigerated trucks transport the fish toward processing plants and seafood markets across Japan. But while salmon fishing already demands dangerous physical labor, another industry pushes Japanese fishermen even farther into the open ocean. Bluefin tuna fishing, one of the most valuable and competitive seafood industries in the world. Nearly 80% of global bluefin tuna catches are eventually used for sushi and sashimi. The value of these fish has become so high that fishermen are willing to spend days at sea chasing a single giant tuna worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Before each voyage, the preparation alone can take hours. Long fishing lines stretching for kilometers are carefully loaded onto the vessel, together with hundreds of hooks and live baits such as herring and mackerel. Once the ship reaches deep offshore waters, the crew slowly releases the massive long-line system into the ocean. Hundreds of baited hooks disappear beneath the surface while the vessel continues moving across the Pacific. Then the waiting begins, sometimes for hours, sometimes through entire storms. Out there, conditions can change without warning. Powerful waves slam against the hull while freezing winds sweep across the deck. Sharks and other predators often attack hooked tuna before the fishermen can retrieve them. But when a giant bluefin finally takes the bait, everything on board changes instantly. The fishing line suddenly pulls tight with incredible force as one of the ocean's strongest predators begins fighting below the surface. Some bluefin tuna can weigh hundreds of kilograms, forcing the crew into a brutal battle of strength and endurance before the fish can finally be brought on board. Once the tuna reaches the deck, the crew immediately begins processing the fish to preserve the meat quality. On many modern vessels, the tuna is transferred directly into advanced freezing chambers capable of keeping the fish fresh throughout long offshore journeys. That extreme level of preservation is one reason bluefin tuna has become so valuable in Japan. At major seafood auctions in Tokyo, premium tuna regularly sell for extraordinary prices. Some giant bluefin have even reached millions of dollars for a single fish. And as long as global demand for sushi continues growing, Japanese fishermen will keep pushing farther into dangerous waters to hunt them. While tuna fishermen battle giant predators far offshore, another part of Japan's seafood industry operates on an even larger industrial scale: sardine fishing. Before sunrise, fishing crews begin scanning the ocean using radar, sonar, and GPS systems capable of tracking entire schools of fish moving beneath the surface. Inside the wheelhouse, glowing monitors continuously search through the dark water while captains study every movement carefully. Modern fishing boats no longer rely only on instinct or experience. Technology now guides almost every decision at sea, but even with advanced sonar systems, finding fish is becoming harder every year. Ocean currents continue changing. Water temperatures shift unpredictably, and many fish schools now move farther away from traditional fishing grounds that once supported entire coastal communities. Sometimes the sonar screens remain almost empty for hours. Inside the boat, the atmosphere becomes unusually quiet. The crew stares at the monitors without speaking while the vessel continues drifting slowly through the dark Pacific, searching for signs of movement below. For older fishermen, that silence feels unfamiliar. Years ago, these waters were crowded with fish. Now some crews spend entire nights searching without catching enough seafood to even cover the fuel costs of the trip. But when the sonar finally detects a large sardine school, everything on board changes instantly. The crew moves into position while two fast-moving boats begin deploying a giant seine net across the ocean surface. As the vessels separate, the net spreads wider and wider through the water until the fish become completely surrounded. Then the most critical stage begins. The crew starts pulling a heavy rope running through the bottom of the net, slowly tightening the opening beneath the fish like a giant drawstring bag. Thousands of sardines suddenly become trapped inside a shrinking wall of moving water. The ocean turns silver. Fish crash violently against the surface, while hydraulic winches begin hauling the massive net back toward the vessel. Even with powerful machinery, the operation still demands perfect coordination between every worker on board. One mistake can damage the net, or allow part of the catch to escape back into the sea. After nearly an hour of hauling, the sardines finally reach the surface. Large scoops and transfer systems immediately begin moving enormous quantities of fish onto nearby carrier vessels where the catch is packed into ice-filled storage compartments to preserve freshness during transport. But the work does not end when the boats return to shore. By 3 or 4 in the morning, the fishing ports are already exploding with activity. Under bright industrial floodlights, forklifts race across the docks while workers unload thousands of boxes of seafood from the boats. Engines roar in every direction as crews shout to each other over the noise of machinery, crashing ice, and moving conveyor systems. The fishing may be over, but Japan's seafood industry never stops moving. Large processing facilities immediately begin sorting, cleaning, and packaging the sardines before they are distributed across supermarkets, seafood markets, and factories throughout the country. Yet while sardine fishing still operates at massive industrial scale, another part of Japan's seafood industry is entering a serious crisis: squid fishing. For decades, squid has been one of the country's most important seafood products. But in recent years, catches have declined dramatically across many regions of Japan. Some fishing boats now spend entire nights offshore only to return with a fraction of what previous generations once harvested from the same waters. As production falls, operating costs continue rising. Many small fishing companies can no longer survive financially. Still, hundreds of squid boats continue leaving port every night, because for many coastal communities, abandoning the sea is not an option. Unlike many other marine species, squid are strongly attracted to light. This behavior has transformed squid fishing into one of the most visually unique industries anywhere in the world. As darkness covers the Pacific, powerful LED lamps suddenly ignite across the decks of the boats. Entire sections of black ocean become flooded with bright white light, powerful enough to be seen from miles away. Beneath the surface, the squid begin rising toward the glow. Long automated jigging systems slowly move rows of artificial lures up and down through the water. As squid attack the moving bait, the machines immediately pull them toward the surface in continuous cycles that can operate for hours without stopping. Rows of squid emerge from the ocean while crews move quickly between the machines removing the catch and preparing the lines for the next haul. Cold seawater crashes across the deck, freezing wind sweeps through the boat, and the machinery continues running through the night. Even with automation, the work remains exhausting, because every successful catch has become more valuable than ever before. And despite all the technology now used across Japan's fishing industry, nobody can guarantee how long the ocean will continue producing enough seafood to sustain it. Japan's seafood industry is not built only on fish. Another enormous harvest takes place much closer to shore: seaweed farming. Along the cold coastal waters of northern Japan, long rows of floating nets stretch across the ocean surface waiting for harvest season to arrive. Some of the country's most important seaweed products, including nori, wakame, and hijiki, are grown here through large-scale aquaculture systems, supplying restaurants and supermarkets across the nation. The process begins during winter when the seawater becomes cold and clear. Young seaweed is carefully attached to suspended nets, placed just beneath the surface where sunlight and ocean nutrients help the plants grow rapidly over the following months. Then, when spring arrives, the harvest finally begins. Fishing boats slowly move through the seaweed farms while workers begin pulling the heavy nets from the water. Thick green layers of seaweed cover the entire surface as rotating cutting systems mounted on the boats carefully slice the soft upper sections away from the nets. At first glance, the work appears calm compared to offshore fishing, but the conditions remain dangerous. The decks quickly become slippery from seawater and loose seaweed while workers stand only a short distance away from moving blades and hauling machinery. Cold wind sweeps across the boat as the heavy nets continue rising and falling throughout the operation. Even a small mistake can lead to serious injuries. After harvesting, the seaweed is washed and carefully sorted by texture, softness, and color. The deepest dark green and glossy black sheets are considered the highest quality and are often reserved for premium sushi restaurants across Japan. In Japanese food culture, even small differences in color and appearance can dramatically affect the value of the final product. That level of precision has become part of the identity of Japan's seafood industry itself. Large processing facilities later dry and press the seaweed into thin sheets of nori used in millions of sushi rolls every single day. A single harvest boat can produce enough seaweed to create thousands of finished sheets in only one trip. And unlike many offshore fishermen, seaweed farmers often welcome rainy weather. Rainwater flowing down from the mountains carries valuable nutrients into coastal waters, helping the seaweed grow faster while improving both quality and yield. But while seaweed farming represents one side of Japan's seafood industry, another part of the ocean becomes far more dangerous during winter. Snow crab season. As temperatures drop across the northern Pacific, powerful fishing vessels begin preparing for one of the harshest and most physically demanding fisheries in the world. On board these ships, the workday often begins around 3 a.m. Outside, freezing winds sweep across the deck while giant waves crash endlessly against the hull. Thick layers of ice form on the railings, ropes, and machinery, turning nearly every surface dangerously slippery. Yet the crews continue working almost nonstop. Some fishermen spend close to 20 hours a day handling heavy traps, pulling frozen ropes, and operating massive hydraulic hauling systems while the ship violently rocks beneath their feet. The conditions are so severe that injuries are considered almost unavoidable during many winter crab seasons. Before departure, large steel traps are stacked high across the deck, together with huge amounts of fuel, food, and equipment needed for long offshore voyages. Once fully loaded, some of these traps weigh hundreds of pounds, becoming extremely dangerous when the ocean turns rough. As the traps rise back from the freezing water, they slam violently against the side of the boat before crashing onto the deck. In heavy seas, the steel cages swing through the air like giant wrecking balls while the crew struggles to control them on the ice-covered surface. One wrong movement can easily crush a hand, break bones, or throw a fisherman directly into the hauling machinery, but the work never slows down. Once the traps reach the deck, the crew immediately begins sorting the snow crabs by size, shell condition, and quality. The catch is then transferred into ice-cold storage systems designed to keep the crabs alive and fresh during the long journey back to shore. Even during freezing storms, the crews continue moving at relentless speed because every successful haul carries enormous value. A strong crab season can generate millions of dollars for fishing companies and coastal communities. But those profits come at a brutal physical cost. Frozen hands, exhausted bodies, sleepless nights, and constant exposure to some of the most dangerous conditions anywhere in the fishing industry. Yet every winter, the fleets continue returning to sea, because as long as global demand for premium seafood continues growing, the pressure to harvest more from the ocean never stops. While snow crab fleets battle freezing storms in the north, another war is taking place far out in the Pacific Ocean. Tuna fishing, and at industrial scale, the operation becomes enormous. Modern seine vessels now use giant nets capable of surrounding entire schools of tuna across huge sections of open water. Inside the control room, radar and sonar systems constantly scan the ocean searching for movement beneath the surface. Once a school is detected, the atmosphere on board changes immediately. The crew rushes into position while a small speedboat races away from the main vessel, dragging one end of the giant net behind it. Slowly, the massive wall of mesh spreads wider and wider across the ocean until the fish become completely surrounded. Then, the most critical moment begins. The crew starts pulling a heavy rope running through the bottom of the net, tightening the opening beneath the fish like a giant drawstring bag. Thousands of tuna suddenly become trapped inside a shrinking space near the surface. The ocean erupts into chaos. Water explodes around the net while large tuna crash violently against each other trying to escape. Hydraulic winches scream under the enormous weight of the catch, as the crew works nonstop to complete the haul before the fish break free. Inside the shrinking net, the movement becomes almost uncontrollable. Silver bodies slam against the surface. Foam covers the water, and the entire ocean seems to boil beneath the lights of the ship. Once the catch is secured, powerful transfer systems begin moving the tuna on board, where workers immediately process and preserve the fish inside refrigerated storage compartments designed for long offshore voyages. But even with modern technology, industrial tuna fishing remains extremely dangerous. Multiple fleets often race toward the same schools of fish at the same time, creating tense situations far offshore where massive vessels maneuver dangerously close to one another in rough weather. One mistake at sea can destroy an entire voyage within seconds. And despite the dominance of industrial fishing, some crews still continue using traditional methods that depend almost entirely on physical endurance. Pole-end line tuna fishing. Instead of giant nets, fishermen stand shoulder to shoulder along the edge of the boat, holding heavy fishing rods, while repeatedly casting bait into the water. As soon as a tuna strikes, the crew pulls the fish on board by hand, before immediately casting again. The process repeats continuously for hours. Waves slam against the hull, while exhausted fishermen maintain the same motion over and over again with almost no rest. Salt water soaks through their gloves while their backs and shoulders slowly wear down from the repetitive strain. But for many smaller crews, this traditional method remains one of the few ways to survive in an industry increasingly controlled by massive industrial fleets. Yet, tuna is not the only seafood driving fishermen into dangerous waters. Octopus fishing has also become one of the most profitable industries in parts of the Pacific. A single successful trip can generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in less than a week, creating intense competition between fishing crews supplying markets across Japan, Korea, and Europe. Most large-scale octopus operations use trap systems. Before departure, workers prepare bait using frozen sardines or herring packed carefully into mesh bags designed to attract octopus. while preventing smaller fish from stealing the bait too quickly. Long main lines carrying dozens of traps are then lowered deep beneath the ocean surface, where they remain underwater for days or even weeks before retrieval begins. When the boats finally return to collect the traps, another exhausting process immediately starts. Heavy ropes rise slowly from deep water while hydraulic systems strain under the weight of the traps below. One by one, the cages emerge from the ocean carrying live octopus twisting violently inside. The crew moves quickly. The octopus are removed, sorted, and transferred into cold storage tanks, while fresh bait is immediately loaded back into the traps for the next deployment. Some larger octopus must be separated carefully because of their aggressive behavior. Without proper handling, they can attack and injure smaller animals trapped nearby. Even with modern equipment, the work remains brutal. Many crews continue operating for up to 17 hours a day under freezing rain, rough seas, and powerful winds. Constant contact with ropes, traps, and octopus tentacles often leaves workers with swollen hands, cuts, and long-term physical injuries. Yet, despite the exhaustion, the crews keep working because every successful trip can completely change a season's profits. Farther north, another valuable industry faces growing pressure from changing ocean conditions. Lobster fishing, the global lobster market is now worth billions of dollars, pushing thousands of boats into coastal waters every season. To maximize their harvests, many crews deploy long rows of heavy traps baited with mackerel or herring and lowered directly onto the seabed. After several days underwater, retrieval begins. The crew hooks floating marker buoys before hydraulic winches slowly pull the traps back toward the surface. Once fully loaded, each trap becomes extremely heavy, forcing the workers into nonstop physical labor throughout the day. Some boats haul hundreds of traps every single trip. Cold winds sweep across the deck while seawater crashes over the sides of the boat. The workers move continuously between ropes, traps, and hauling systems with almost no time to rest. And despite all the effort, catches in some regions continue declining as changing ocean temperatures and environmental pressure affect lobster populations. Still, every season the fleets continue returning to sea, because whether it is tuna, octopus, lobster, squid, or snow crab, the global demand for seafood never slows down. And somewhere beyond the horizon tonight, another fishing boat is already preparing to leave port and head back into the darkness. Every morning across Japan, millions of people begin another day with seafood that arrived from the ocean only hours earlier. Fresh tuna appears at sushi counters. Salmon fills supermarket shelves. Squid, crab, lobster, oysters, and seaweed move through restaurants, seafood markets, and processing factories across the country. For most people, it feels completely normal. But behind that everyday meal lies one of the largest and most demanding seafood industries on Earth, an industry powered by freezing oceans, sleepless crews, dangerous machinery, and nonstop labor. Far offshore, thousands of fishing boats continue moving through the Pacific day and night. Giant purse, seine nets surround entire schools of fish while radar and sonar systems search constantly beneath the surface. Hydraulic winches haul massive catches from deep water as freezing chambers preserve seafood immediately after harvest. The industrial system never truly stops. Even after the boats return to shore, the work continues through the night. Under bright floodlights at fishing ports across Japan, forklifts race between stacks of seafood containers while workers unload fresh catches before dawn. Conveyor systems continue moving. Ice crashes across the concrete floors. Engines roar through the harbor while trucks wait to transport seafood toward processing plants and major cities across the country. By sunrise, much of the seafood has already entered Japan's enormous food network. But beneath that efficiency, another reality is becoming impossible to ignore. The ocean is changing. Fish populations are declining in many regions. Squid catches have collapsed compared to previous decades. Many fishermen now travel farther offshore while spending more money on fuel, equipment, and labor just to catch enough seafood to survive another season. For older crews, the difference is becoming painfully clear. Some remember when the sonar screens were once crowded with fish almost every night. Today, many boats drift silently through dark water for hours, searching for signs of life beneath the surface. And sometimes, the ocean stays empty. Yet despite the uncertainty, thousands of fishermen continue returning to sea because entire coastal communities still depend on the industry to survive. For many crews, fishing is no longer simply a profession passed down through generations. It has become a constant battle against rising costs, dangerous weather, shrinking resources, and physical exhaustion. Some spend weeks away from their families, working through freezing storms with almost no sleep. Others continue fishing despite injuries because one successful season can support an entire town financially. The ocean feeds millions of people, but it demands an enormous price in return. And now, one question is becoming more important every year. How long can industrial fishing continue at this scale before the oceans reach their limit? Because no matter how advanced the technology becomes, no matter how powerful the ships grow, the sea itself is still finite. Somewhere beyond the horizon tonight, another fleet is already preparing to leave port under freezing rain and dark skies. The crews will load fuel, prepare the nets, stack the traps, and head back into dangerous waters once again. All so that tomorrow morning, fresh seafood can appear once more on dining tables across Japan and around the world. A global industry worth billions of dollars, built on human endurance, dangerous oceans, and thousands of fishermen willing to risk everything each time they sail into the darkness.
到现在中午12点钟，已经骑了3